My father was a lawyer. He came out of Boston College, was invited to join what we would call a white shoe law firm, the upper class, I'll say, of Lowell. My mother stayed at home. She was a teacher, graduated summa cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa, very bright woman. She had to retire from her position as teacher in the Lawrence High School when she got married because it was still the Depression. And you would be supported by your husband, of course, so you should give the job up to someone who needed it to support their family.
Your sister is a doctor. You became a lawyer.
Right.
Born at a time when not a lot of women were going to either medical school or law school. What do you attribute that to in terms of your upbringing, your family life?
I would say primarily to my mother. I think she lamented that in her generation women didn't have opportunities, and it wasn't going to happen to her daughters, that we were going to get all the same opportunities her sons got.
You went to Mount Holyoke College.
I did.
So what year was that when you entered?
Well, I entered in 66,
66.
Graduated in 70.
So those were busy political times.
The Vietnam War issues came out, women's rights became forefront, and I can, again, a sort of switch got turned, I guess, in my life, and I began to get active in my junior year. Eventually ran for student government president. I was elected, and so I served in that capacity at a time at the college was quite a bit of upheaval, and we were very much pushing students' rights and the involvement of students in the governance and decision-making in the college. I learned a lot, I think, from being involved in student government and being active in the college life, I'll call it, that I wouldn't have learned in the classroom.
And what did you like about that role?
I like engaging in issues that might not be what I would normally confront. So, for example, I'm in the chemistry lab, right? And I'm dealing with the folks that are my professors or my colleagues who are my classmates who are majoring. And then all of a sudden I'm in a meeting with the dean of the college and the head of the faculty and 3 or 4 other senior faculty members going toe-to-toe with a couple other students trying to persuade them why student power should work at Mount Holyoke, why we should be involved in the interviewing process for a new president or a new dean or things like that. It's just, I guess, I like difference. I like change of pace. I don't like to do the same thing over and over again.
When did you think about applying to law school?
The more I thought about it, I thought I was more suited to the law, and maybe that's because of the student government work, the sort of stating your position, being verbal, being on your feet, being able to present something, make a persuasive case. That was, so it was sort of all of those things coming together, I think, led me to decide, I'll take the LSATs. As far as law school goes, NYU, I think, was unique at the time. My class had 25% women, and that was enough of a critical mass that I didn't feel different. I felt like I had every right and belonged as much as anybody else.
You're finishing law school and decide to take the bar. Where do you do that?
I decided I was going to go back to Massachusetts. I wanted to live in Boston, and I ended up at Hale and Dorr and took the bar that June.
You're married at this point to David?
Yes, yeah. We married the year after we both moved to Boston. He always wanted to work on Capitol Hill, and coming out of law school, he couldn't get a position. One day, out of the blue, he gets a call from the chief counsel of the Government Affairs Committee of the Senate, who worked for Senator Ribicoff, saying, I have your resume, like from months ago when you applied, would you like to come down for an interview? So he ended up working on the committee as a deputy counsel, and then he moved over to the senator's personal staff and did judiciary legal issues. So I said, well, I can find something to do in Washington. So I actually ended up in the antitrust division at Justice.
What was the drive back to Connecticut?
After 4 years in D.C., we'd had our first child, Ben. We had a fantastic nanny, but, everybody gets sick. And there was one day she called at 7:30. She had the flu. She had a fever. There was no way she could come. Well, unfortunately, I was supposed to be presenting a case to the grand jury that day downtown in the federal courthouse, and my husband was supposed to be floor managing a bill with Senator Ribicoff that afternoon. I can still remember that day. I went down to the courthouse. I did the morning session, and then I turned it over to one of the people that was on the team to handle the afternoon. And drove home at 1 o'clock. I left the car running in the middle of Brandywine, which is where we lived. The door open, and I still see myself going up the pathway to our house and David coming down the pathway, jumping in the car. It's now 1:30, getting to the Capitol Hill, and he got to the floor at 2:01 to start that session of the Senate. And we sort of took that moment to think about, can we really make this work here? Wouldn't we be better closer to family with some support? And David very much wanted to come to Connecticut. He said, well, look, you see if you find a job you like in Connecticut. If you don't, then we won't go to Connecticut. So I started looking, and that's when I ended up at Robinson & Cole. And so that's how we ended up in Connecticut.
So you mentioned Ben and
Right.
the beginnings of your family. Other children?
I have a daughter, Sarah, and a son, Jonathan.
How did that work as you progress in your career?
I don't think I read a book for probably 15 or 20 years while my kids were growing up, and I was trying to try cases and be a lawyer and on the managing committee and those sorts of things. Certain things just become unimportant. We again had a very good daycare worker in Connecticut, and she too would get sick. But now, at 7:30, after I hung up from Katie telling me she couldn't be there that day, I would dial Grandpa, and Grandpa would be in the driveway by 7:50, ready to take over. So that really was the answer. And the other lucky thing was I doubt I'd be a judge if I hadn't come to Connecticut, because I think Senator Dodd had a view towards selection of candidates that was different than in other states.
So talk about that.
When I spoke with the senator, he said that his father, of course, had been a senator before him, Tom Dodd, and he said his father had said to him that the most important thing he did as a senator was to identify candidates for the federal court, because they will have an impact long past your tenure as a senator.
You were nominated by Senator
Well, he
Dodd.
recommended me to the president,
Right,
but at
who
that
nominated
time, because
you.
it was a Democratic
Right.
president, Democratic senators, pretty much at the district court level, it was the senator's pick.
And then the confirmation process took how long?
Actually, not too long, all things considered. I mean, it felt like forever. We were announced at a press conference on St. Patrick's Day, actually, up at the Capitol. And we got a hearing in June, and we got a vote in September.
So, Judge, do you have a judicial philosophy?
I guess first, I am a firm believer in the rule of law. I think that's how justice results. I think the other, it's not a philosophy, but I think it's really important that judges be open-minded. And I think that the danger as a judge is when you think you know everything you need to know, and you are sort of, I'll say, locked in. And everything gets driven, all your decisions get driven by that locked-in perspective. I think that's does no one justice and no one any good in our society. What drives a judge is an open-mindedness to the idea that there may be another argument that hasn't been made that may cause you to see something in a different light and therefore reach a different decision.